Rachel, anything we need to know before we start?
Chad's gonna start us off. Welcome everybody,
Right.
etc. I will briefly not introduce you so you can introduce yourselves. And give you the floor to talk as you'd like. And when you are ready to sort of wind down and take questions, um, I I'll try to
Moderate?
facilitate that.
Facilitate. Good. Okay. Yeah.
So,
Riman and I agreed that we would do basically a total of about 30 minutes between introducing ourselves, talking about our experiences, and then specifically focusing on where we find hope through our educational and activism stuff. And then we'll be sure to finish so that there's 15 minutes for Q&A conversation. Does that sound like a reasonable plan?
perfect.
Great.
It is the part of the semester I've noticed where the students, the faculty are exhausted. So if your time goes over and there's only 10 minutes for questions, that might be enough. It's hard to tell how awake and alert and responsive folks are at this point in the term.
Okay.
Just saying, I'm noticing.
Is that sort of like a pre-turkey lethargy that that people are anticipating, or?
I'm not sure, but there always was a rhythm to courses where people reach a point of sort of saturation in their brains
Right.
and exhaustion in their, in their rhythms of work. And the online learning platform exacerbates that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Hello, all. I see folks are slowly filling the Zoom room here, so I will give it just a little bit, and then I will open us up with some centering words of gathering when I see the numbers sort of steady out. Hello, all. I want to welcome you to this Wednesday gathering on November 20th. My name is Chad Swickerath. I am the Vice President for Advancement and Strategic Initiatives. For our words of gathering today, I wanted to read an excerpt from the book, The Overshadowed Preacher. Dr. Jerusha Neal was a TA for my preaching class when I was in seminary. I grew up Presbyterian, went to a Presbyterian seminary where we were required to take public speaking and a preaching course. Dr. Jerusha is now an assistant professor at Duke. And in her book, she writes from a journal entry. And she writes, I am standing in front of my speech communications class in a United States seminary, a required course for all incoming students. Are there any questions, I ask? It is March. We have been together for 6 months. We have talked about performative exegesis and the vocal interpretation of Scripture. We've talked about inflection and emphasis, phrasing and rate. We've talked about volume and poise and internalization, about eye contact, gesture, stage fright. But now the question comes. A woman in the front row raises her hand and asks it tentatively, almost sheepishly. as if she should know the answer, but doesn't. "What do you think we are doing when we preach?" she asks. "I mean, what are we really doing? What do you think it means when we say that we speak God's word?" The entire class turns to me with expectant eyes, pencils ready. They have been waiting for someone to have the courage to ask. This little bit of Jerusha's book reminds me of two things. It reminds me to ask the bold questions, but also be prepared to hear the courageous answers. And it reminds me that when we speak our truths, when we hear someone else speak, something profound happens. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday gathering today.
Thank you, Chad. I love that opening. I don't know if she gives her answer in the book, but I would love to see that too. So I'm so excited that we have with us today Riman Barakat and Jared Goldfarb. I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves. I do want to share how these exceptional individuals came to speak with us today. Jared is our amazing guide when we lead a study tour course in Israel and Palestine. If I thought I had a lot of contacts in diverse communities, he has infinitely more. And he has introduced us to incredible folks, people who work with courage and vision and creativity to pursue justice and peace and beauty and inclusion and understanding. And so we love him and everybody he introduces us to. So I am extraordinarily excited. Although I haven't yet had the chance to meet her in Palestine, I'm extraordinarily excited that today we get to meet Riman. I sometimes despair of the discourse in the US where folks, I believe, could be allies, can't even talk together here in relative comfort and safety. So I often turn to those who live in the land to soak up their wisdom and to to recognize that, to recognize what really is required to build a just peace and a sustainable future together. So without further ado, Jared and Iman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for the invitation to host us for this conversation. I'll just explain in two brief words that Riman and I will introduce ourselves, share a little bit about our lives, our connection to the land. We'll share also some of our experiences, how we have personally lived through this very tragic series of events, and also within their greater historical context. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the work that we both do in terms of education and or activism, and how that impacts our ability to keep pushing through in our lives in the land, and how we find hope amidst the darkness, perhaps. So I'll begin briefly just with an introduction to myself. My name is Jared Goldfarb. I was born in the United States, in the state of New Hampshire. I was raised in a fairly strongly identified Jewish family, although living in New Hampshire, which is not terribly known for its Jewish community, it was somewhat of a superficial Jewish identity. We were very actively involved, but didn't necessarily have a depth to identity. And that sort of pushed me over the years, certainly after going to university in Boston, to get more involved in the Jewish community and to seek out my own particular Jewish identity. And one of the things I very quickly realized as I started to sort of willingly invest time and energy into building for myself a Jewish identity, a Jewish community, was that many, many other young adult Jews with whom I was now engaging, specifically in the vibrant Jewish world in Boston, had all had experiences in Israel. And that was something I knew absolutely nothing about. It was never an option growing up. And so I decided I wanted my opportunity to sort of complete the puzzle by having that experience. And so I came to visit Jerusalem and the land of Israel in 1996, almost 30 years ago. And I basically fell in love with everything about the place, and I never left. And so I have called Jerusalem home for those 28 plus years now. And in making that space my home, I have basically I dove in the deep end, both in terms of Jewish identity, my own learning experience, which then became a sort of an investment in education, committed to teaching the texts, the traditions in the Jewish world that enabled me to feel like I belonged. I had a connection to my own faith community and history. And then the longer I lived in Jerusalem, the more it became clear that my sort of newfound Jewish identity, as beautiful it was very much contained in a bubble. And that bubble did not reflect any sense of reality in the Holy Land. And so I sort of made it a mission, a new mission, to try to break out of my bubble and get to know the rest of the world around me. And being having been somewhat sheltered as a kid living in the woods of New Hampshire, I was not aware of a Palestinian identity. I did not know the word Palestine. I barely knew the word Israel. I certainly knew very little about Christianity and Islam. And so for most of the last 25 years, I have made it my mission to not only learn about these communities, these identities, these traditions, and particularly the narratives, but I have then sort of fallen into that same sort of loving relationship with teaching those various stories and engaging with those stories in person all over the land. And so that's pretty much what I do now. I am predominantly, I teach a lot of international programs, predominantly Christians that come from around the world to learn in different academic institutions. And I am also a licensed tour guide, as Rachel said, and I have worked with CTS for a number of different trips through Israel-Palestine. I design overseas study programs for different academic institutions, and sometimes just work with families and groups of friends that want to come and explore. I'll do basically anything that allows for that opportunity to not only learn about the land and its histories, but to also really engage with the different populations and identities that live there. One final note, and I'll turn it over to Riman to introduce herself, is that I am currently in the United States, just to sort of be very transparent about what's going on. Given the events over the last year plus, in particularly since October 7th, I have been unable to do any teaching or any guiding in the land, certainly not enough to sustain my family. And so I took advantage of a privilege that I have as an American citizen to leave and to come to the United States. And I'm currently spending the semester traveling around the country teaching in order to earn at least a minimum income to be able to pay my bills, keep my kids fed. And so it is very challenging for me to be so far away from home. But I do recognize that I have a unique privilege and a blessing that many of my Israeli colleagues and most of my Palestinian friends and colleagues do not have. And that is the ability to simply get up and go to escape the war and to find work elsewhere. I'll talk a little bit about that as we sort of move through these different stages. But for now, I want to turn it over to Riman to introduce herself and talk about her experiences over the last year.
Hi, so I'm Riman, and I'm a Palestinian from East Jerusalem. I grew up, I was 7 years old when the first Intifada started, which meant that, we didn't have, we couldn't go to school for 6 months. And in the particular school that I went to, which was very close to Damascus Gate in Jerusalem, there was particularly a lot of violence. And so I grew up very much in an atmosphere of fear of division. East and West Jerusalem, there was like this psychological border between East and West Jerusalem. We wouldn't cross to West Jerusalem. We wouldn't have a reason to. We would be afraid. And I usually mention kind of two things that opened my eyes to start learning about the other side. So growing up and in that reality, I only saw initially Israelis as enemies, and right outside of my schoolyard, I would see soldiers wearing their suits, and the only kind of normal human interaction I had was really my grandfather had a shop in the old city, right at the entrance to Damascus Gate. And sometimes after school, I would go visit him. And oftentimes he'd have Jewish Israeli kind of partners, other retailers that he would buy products from. And he would be drinking tea, and it felt like that was the only experience as a child, seeing interactions of Israelis and Palestinians in a normal setting, in a comfortable setting. The other thing that opened my eyes was that at my school we read this short story that was written actually by a Palestinian author from the town of Beit Sahur next to Bethlehem. And the title of the short story was called Soldiers Cry Too. And again, that made me curious. And it was about this soldier that that kind of like was expressing how torn he was at what he was going to do, letting this, I think, pregnant woman pass or not. And it kind of like really got me curious and thinking about the other side. And later on, as kind of like I grew up and went to university, and you know, I got involved in programs that create dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians. And I really went on a journey, you know, so starting from my own narrative, seeing things a particular way as a Palestinian, I went on a journey of getting to know the other. And so I continued to be involved, and I went on to studies. I initially studied English and comparative literature, and then eventually studied Middle Eastern studies and political science. And so the story of Israeli and Palestinian dialogue and creating relationships with Israelis has kind of like taken up. It's become the thing I do on a daily basis. And I want to kind of like mark here kind of a couple of important moments for me. So kind of like jumping to more recent history. So 10 years ago, exactly 2014, Jerusalem went ablaze, but also the region. There was like a war on Gaza. In Jerusalem in particular, it was the kidnapping of the three boys around Jerusalem, 3 Israeli boys, the kidnapping of Muhammad Abu Khdair from Sharafat. And we found ourselves, I found myself kind of like this reality resurging. And I had then gotten involved in initiatives. I particularly was involved in this initiative called Breaking the Impasse, which involved Palestinian business people and Israeli business people, really at the top level of you know, I did for many years track to diplomacy, and so that was kind of like the last big initiative I was involved in, and you know, sort of everything was collapsing in front of my eyes. So this business community couldn't speak to each other anymore and stopped speaking to each other anymore. And I looked at that and I was like, you know, like these people with all the resources that they have, with all the you know, that advantage of thinking in a creative business kind of oriented way couldn't kind of break through. They couldn't really break the impasse, and they didn't, and when the war happened, they didn't know like to call each other up, whether it was um those people running companies in Tel Aviv checking on their Gaza colleague, or counterpart that they had just been with a week before, or vice versa, the Gazan colleagues checking counterparts, checking on those people in the companies in Tel Aviv. And we were in this one meeting where in Tel Aviv, actually, where we had to go to the bomb shelter together. So anyway, to kind of jump a little bit, I'm kind of emphasizing this moment in time, because this is when I kind of left the diplomacy world, the track to diplomacy world, and I met people in Jerusalem who were involved in the arts and culture, and I was blown away by what the arts could do to kind of like ignite people's imagination and humanize. And so I got involved with this group. We're officially called the Jerusalem Season of Culture. And today, so 10 years later, which is now, I'm right now at a cultural house, art space on the seam line between East and West Jerusalem. And since October 7th, we've brought together about 10,000 Israelis and Palestinians in equal numbers, artists. If in 2023, like prior to the war, we struggled to bring Palestinian artists to kind of like co-create with Israeli artists, since October 7th, every single event, every single week, we have Palestinian artists at stage, and not only on stage, but publicly announcing who they are, not shying away, choosing to be in this position. And I'm like talking about a community, like I'll speak for myself. I'll say that my family, we lost friends in Gaza. I also lost people I knew on the Israeli side. Like I've been active with Women Wage Peace in 2016, and I was part of thinking together. Vivian Silver was one of the people lost on October 7th. And I remember us being in this room in Tantur, thinking about what we could do as a group of Israeli and Palestinian women. I'll just say a few more things and then kind of stop and leave it for, leave the rest to talk about maybe in a little bit. But what I want to say is that October 7th was a shock for such an organization like ours, and just like everybody else in the world, and definitely for after October 7th, the reaction to Gaza, and what this kind of like it's beyond sort of beyond imaginable, and to see people just die in those numbers every day. And I look at it, we're in Jerusalem, and we have an advantage. We have an advantage that Israelis and Palestinians can still meet, have been able to meet. We've developed muscles, skills to learn how to talk to each other despite the complexity. And with Gaza and the West Bank, there isn't that opportunity. There is division, and there is like a lot more. It's a lot more easier to demonize the other side. And so for me, this kind of like the contact was what rescued us as a community, as a center, as the I'll maybe stop here, and maybe we can kind of go deeper if we have time.
Thanks, Riman. We obviously our goal is to allow for conversation and questions. So I'll share a little bit about my experiences as Iman did, and talk a little bit about some of the work that I'm involved in, and then we would very much love for you all to join in the conversation, share your thoughts, ask questions, specifically, using the two of us as sort of examples or local resources. Also, I imagine most of you have been deeply affected by what you are witnessing in the media. For those that I assume most have not been in the land throughout the last year. Waking up on October 7th in Jerusalem in my home, immediately hearing the sirens, and everybody, running down into the bomb shelters, and then everybody talking about what was going on. It was just ultimate chaos. Unfortunately, one of the first stories that came out, even though it was a Jewish holiday and many religious Jews like myself were not connected to technology, I had no access to information. Other than, when we finally went out onto the street or in the bomb shelter and people were exchanging information, one of those first stories that came out was of all the young people at the music festival, where ultimate chaos ensued. And there were a number of people that found themselves in sort of a kind of a bomb shelter in a field, where there were two young men who were trying to protect all of the other party goers on the inside from the folks who were attacking, from Hamas, who were attacking on the outside. There were a number of grenades being thrown in, and one of those young men, actually both of them, were trying to pick up the grenades and throw them back out again. It just so happens that those two young men were from families that I am very close with in Jerusalem. I watched these young men grow up. My kids are friends with their kids. One of them was killed immediately in that attack. His name was Anar Shapira, and he lives literally just a few buildings down from me. And the other young man, I imagine you know his name, Hirsch Poland Goldberg, and his parents are also close friends, live in Jerusalem, and he was in captivity up until when he was killed about a month back. My last experience in Israel before I hopped on a plane and came to America was going to Hirsch's funeral in Jerusalem. And so this last year, for me at least, has very much been bookended also by tragedy, which I think is a shared experience for everybody in the land, Israeli-Palestinian or otherwise. And there is something quite unique about having spent the last year in Jerusalem. As Riman said, Jerusalem is a little bit of a bubble, both in the sense that it has had the least direct impact of any of the sort of the military events that are taking place, or the violence that is taking place. And so, in a weird way, if you just sort of tune out a lot of things going on, it's almost as our regular lives, to a certain extent, certainly for Jewish Israelis, probably more than Palestinians in East Jerusalem. It feels like life can almost be normal. Kids go to school, people go out to dinner. You can go to the movies at night. And there have been very, very few sort of sirens announcing some sort of aerial attack in Jerusalem. And so it's been a very weird experience in that sense. And one of the things that has become very, very clear to me, and that this then brings me to the sort of the last thing that I want to say, in terms of activism and involvement that gives me hope, is that especially in the freedom of sort of relative freedom of the life that we live in Jerusalem at the moment, or certainly have since October 7th, the privilege of being a Jewish Israeli has become very pronounced for me. My ability to be able to do things and continue on with my life But when I speak to the Palestinians that I've been engaged with through education, through tourism, or just as friends and neighbors, the experience has often been, especially for those, clearly for those who are in Gaza, but also for those who are much closer to me, in the heart of Palestine in West Bank, is very, very different. The dynamic is so just crazily imbalanced. And so all of the normal activities that I would normally engage in terms of education were not available to me because I generally am working in an international arena. And so I made the best effort that I could to try to keep engaging with the people that I would normally want to sit with and talk with and learn from in an educational setting, even though those educational settings didn't exist. So I just want to give three very brief examples, as Riman shared about some of her activities, and then we'll open it up to questions and conversation. The first is an institute called the Arava Institute. It's actually a branch of a university in Israel that is based in a small kibbutz all the way in the southern region, just outside of Eilat, very close to the Red Sea, where they invite and welcome Jewish students, Israelis or internationals, Palestinian students, Jordanians, Egyptians, basically anyone who would like to come and study environmental issues and policy and activism and science, with a sort of a one founding kind of principle, and that is that the environment doesn't care about our man-made boundaries or our differences in identity, and so we really have no choice but to work together, despite politics and war and anything else that happens. And so I've been involved with many different educational projects at the Arava Institute over the years, and it has been amazing to see that more or less the learning still goes on there. Many of the activities are somewhat limited. Clearly, travel and participation is somewhat limited, but it's a wonderful example of how, even at the worst of times, the fact that our natural world doesn't stop challenging us, especially in reaction to our own human flaws that we have projected onto the world around us, coming together and being able to work as teams and simply get to know each other as humans who care, rather than divide ourselves by faith, identity, or politics, has been truly inspiring. Another organization that I've been very involved with for many years, I actually sit on the board of it, is called the Interfaith Encounter Association, where we sort of work as an umbrella group where we have about 40 plus different small community encounter groups all over the country. There's even 1-2 in America, where the sole purpose is simply to encourage and facilitate people of different faith identities getting together. They can literally do anything in the room once they're there. They could study text together. They could talk about politics. They could simply discuss being neighbors. It could literally be anything, but our goal is to try to create as many of these rooms as possible in as many different communities so people feel that they can get to know each other. As Riman said, and I think it's quite common in the sort of Israeli-Palestinian dynamic, most of us don't really have the opportunity. We're not sort of in a world where we're constantly encountering each other until perhaps the worst moments, like when Israelis go to the military and for the first time are meeting Palestinians in a very imbalanced power dynamic, or for Palestinians who might be trying to drive to work and go through a checkpoint. And so meeting on that level is probably not super healthy and not super productive. And so we're trying to counter that by creating space where literally anyone, and 99%, I would say, of our participants don't have any particular status in society or goals or roles that they're playing that they need to have this experience. It's just about the basic humanity of simply wanting to engage and meet people who are different than they are, and then try to build relationships and trust. And we have seen that those communities, as small as they are, sometimes less than 10 people, have really created a very different ability for people to survive the events of the last year, because now they have someone, quote unquote, on the other side that they can engage with. somebody that they can talk to. Like Rachel said, she might turn to Riman or to me to sort of understand what's going on the ground. And so people who maybe aren't engaged, like Riman and I are, in this world of social justice activism and education, can pick up the phone and call somebody that they've gotten to know just through this, group that meets in somebody's kitchen once a month. So that's been very powerful. And the last thing I'll share is a group that some folks may have heard of. I know Rachel knows well, called Rabbis for Human Rights. While I myself am not a rabbi, I have become very, very active over the years, and this last year even more active in this organization, which specifically tries to bring a Jewish face to social justice activism, specifically in Palestinian communities, where many Palestinians, I think often because of their first engagements with Israelis, view Israel as, the oppressor, the conqueror, the military power. And so we want to put a Jewish ethical face on this idea of partnering, of being neighbors, of living together and sharing narratives and sharing a land, whether it's working together in the olive harvest, whether it's sleeping with out in the field with the shepherds who are trying to tend their flocks. I'm sure many of you have heard in the media, there's been a very sharp rise in the amount of extreme acts and violence perpetrated by Jews, which is extremely embarrassing to me as an Israeli Jew, particularly in the West Bank area. And so there's a lot of areas where, again, taking advantage of the privilege that Jewish Israelis have, whether sometimes we like it or not, to then extend that opportunity to be able to show solidarity, to work in partnership, to learn and engage with each other, but predominantly to simply say that we as Jews believe that we can live together, we can share the space and the experience. And so whether it's, agriculture or education or simply just spending time together, that is a Jewish value. And certainly as somebody who I outwardly identifies as religious, I wear a kippah, I'm usually seen without knowing me as perhaps an extremist, because that's how many religious Jews are viewed, especially given the Israeli government today. I find it to be very powerful to simply walk into a Palestinian community and sit and listen and let them tell me what their needs are and how I can maybe help. And so those are three activities that I have found tremendous inspiration in participating. And I have great confidence that is communities like those and communities like JSOC that Riman shared, these cultural interactions, these are the activities, these are the people and the communities that are going to lead us out of this conflict, regardless whatever military or political resolution needs to happen. All of that clearly will be short-term. The only way to ensure a future of peace and justice is to engage in these quieter activities moving forward. Riman, do you want to add anything to that, or should we open it up for conversation?
We can open it up to conversation, sure.
Great. So at this point, I would love to invite anyone who wants to raise a hand, or I don't know, Rachel, I'll let you facilitate how this works, but we are ready to answer your questions and share more thoughts, whatever interests you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm going to take the privilege of the first question while other people think about theirs. And yes, let's ask folks to formally do the raise hand function, and then they'll appear in our screen and we'll know to call on them. Riman, I would love for you to say more about your work with in the arts. And while you're answering that, if you could also speak to the moment, you said something that really interested me about after October 7th, the Palestinian, it sounded like it was much easier to get Palestinians who wanted to be involved in this project and to be visible and public about it. And I would love for you to sort of examine why that is and how those dynamics, what are the implications of those dynamics going forward?
Okay. Shall I answer that, or do we want to take more questions?
Let's do them one at a time for now.
Okay. So first of all, so I mentioned that FeelBeit is an arts and culture center on the seam line between East and West Jerusalem. And so post October 7th, the first weeks, it was really hard to meet. And one of the first things that we did is of course like meet amongst our team and really talk to each other, have a deep conversation. And the result of that deep conversation was expressing a lot of empathy towards each other. I think that was kind of central in first, for us as a core team, kind of recuperating and understanding what we are and what we want. And then we understood that there are people, in our community that we can invite to the space just to like have a meal. And so we thought of all those people, who are those people that if we invite right now, they would come and share a meal and they would talk. So we focused first on these core communities, the communities that were closest to us, and then we decided that our community is now ready. We see that there is readiness to for us to return to some of our activities, and so what we offered initially is a series of events, weekly events, and we called a specific line "No Words." And we chose the title of that line very intentionally because everybody was struggling to express, and talk about what was going on. And so the mere fact that there was a space that you could walk into and just recognize that the people who you knew are the people you knew and that they are still who they are was really important. And so we continued doing that. Now, about the participation of the Palestinian artists, I cannot explain it, in a logical way, except that FeelBeit is not an organization that is giving space for Palestinians. It's an organization that is both Palestinian and Israeli, which is really important to emphasize. We don't shy away here from having books about Palestine, Palestinian arts, culture, it's very, the Palestinian identity is very pronounced. Our team is 50-50, our team is, has very strong Palestinian identity. And similarly, like the Israelis that are here are kind of like representing different backgrounds. And so this is really important because when Palestinians walk in, at the time, I'll emphasize that the first month or so of the like right after the war, there was like a silencing, at every level. Like if I was driving into East Jerusalem, I would see checkpoints stopping, like border police stopping Palestinian young men in particular, checking their phones, and if there was anything remotely referring to Gaza, they would be like beaten up. They would be like it was a horrific, revengeful reaction towards Palestinians. And so for Palestinians and Palestinian artists especially, who want to express who they are and what their grievances are, and FeelBeit welcomes that. And not only that, it's a space where also Israelis can, again, we're not using words, but in an artistic way, we're mediating those grievances. So I think that was kind of like what allowed, or what made it feel for all the Palestinian artists that this is a safe space for them to express their voices at a time where there was a lot of silencing going on. And what emerged from it is a lot of empathy, like I think in the two directions. So that's what I would kind of like how I would answer to that. And we carefully curated all of our artistic offerings to answer to those times. So for example, in September, we had a 3-week peak period that was a result of a residency program of 10 artists, 5 from each side. And we called it The House at the Heart of the Storm. And the theme that it tackled was about home, because we felt that home, in those times, home is a theme that is kind of like many people have lost their home, they don't have a home. And so all these artists kind of like found an angle in which to express that. So I think the relevance, the need also for kind of I don't know what to call it, like a sane house, a space where you can have normal sort of relationships when everything else outside is screaming, is way out of proportion, and the degree of violence that is out there is it's just so overwhelming. Every minute we're being traumatized, till now, by all this media, and there's no way. I mean, the trauma that everybody's like absorbing, that you need to find a space to heal, and to heal together constantly. And so this is in a way what FeelBeit has offered, going back to what Jared was saying, is that we're prototyping a better future. We're saying, we're realizing, it is frustrating that we cannot do anything about what has happened, not on October 7th, and not about what's going on in Gaza right now, and now it's expanding to Lebanon and so on. And Israelis will say also how frustrated they are about what's going on in their own government and all of that. And so we focus on what we can do, so that when others, we offer it for those who will be able, we're there for those people who need us. Like that's, we are privileged, I cannot deny that, and like Jared said, Jerusalem has, we haven't almost had, very, very few sirens and so on. But that gives us more responsibility to offer something better.
Thank you. Folks want to chime in with questions or reflections?
You can ask us anything.
Don't be shy.
This is Dennis in Chicago. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
In the Christian tradition, the just war tradition and aiming for a just peace goes all the way back to Augustine, probably. There's a conversation in progressive circles about working for a just peace. Does that concept have currency in Judaism and Islam? That's the first question. And then if that is an aspiration that we aim for, what would be the essential ingredients in Israel-Palestine for a just peace?
Wow. That's a question. Riman, you mind if I take a crack at the Jewish response?
Sure.
I think actually I know for a fact that that Rachel can adequately speak to the concept of just peace in Judaism much better than I, but certainly reflecting what's happening on the ground, I would say that it's not so much the concept of just peace, but it's enacting just peace that I am more concerned about, and certainly more engaged with. I am very confident that, of course, there is, the anchor of through the textual tradition of a just peace, but it's one of the few things I probably do not engage with so much academically, but rather just try to live out. So I would say there are a couple of components that I would find as central to the concept of just peace. One is recognizing the fact that so many of us in Israel and Palestine live our lives according to narrative more so than history or facts on the ground. And so the first step, I think, in just peace would be to openly acknowledge and recognize that fact, that the way that we tell our stories is often what puts us in conflict or in opposition to our neighbors, to the other communities that exist around us. And so recognizing that when we tell our stories and our deep connections to the land and how, we can't possibly stray from the path of God or the promises of our ancestors, that is a narrative. It's not necessarily rooted in anything other than that. And while our narratives are extremely important, I would never be living in Jerusalem if not for embracing my own Jewish narrative in the relation to the land. I want to see more of my fellow Jews openly acknowledging that, because as soon as we remember that, it automatically, at least as far as I perceive it, automatically provides space for additional narratives. Because as we find ourselves sometimes committed to shouting our stories at each other, right, the inability to listen, we don't make room for any other people or land relationships, and that is often what these things boil down to, because we often are either educated to believe or simply want to ignore the fact that our narrative is the only one that matters. And so that's a very important component for me. The second thing that I would say, and that I try to engage with as much as possible, again, given the privilege that I have as an Israeli Jew, especially in navigating across the various boundaries that exist in Israel-Palestine, is recognizing that we all are attached to all of the land. And so even the political solutions that seem very practical and fair, like a two-state solution, I don't view those as just, because they could provide a very necessary short-term resolution to conflict and bring a certain amount of peace to our land and to our communities. But they're not just in the sense that they don't recognize the stories that we tell and the places where those stories happen and how we feel connected to them, whether it be the ancient narrative of our biblical ancestors or simply the fact that our families might have lived on a particular plot of land for centuries. And so as much as we might want to quickly get to a practical solution, we often ignore the fact that those short-term practicalities don't necessarily acknowledge what's at the core of maybe a just peace, or certainly a just relationship. And that is that I can certainly see the entirety of the land of Israel and maybe beyond as part of my inheritance and my story, whereas many of my Palestinian neighbors would say the exact same thing. So how do we navigate that space, living on that same piece of land while wanting different national expressions? That's a conversation I would like to engage with more as a core principle of a just peace.
Okay.
Riman, feel free to.
Do you want? Yeah, I just wanted to say that, for me as a Palestinian from East Jerusalem, like, I don't have the same rights as Jared. Jared just told his story about like him living in the United States and then moving here. I was born here. But I don't have the same rights as he does. Having said that, there is the here and now. And I'm not someone that, I feel that, dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian narrative as like trying to figure out whose narrative is more legitimate or more powerful is just a vicious circle, and it won't get us anywhere. There is the here and now, and we are all here now on this land, and we have to figure out a way for us to have a system where it offers equal rights. And therefore, I can't, influence, the structure right now, but in what I'm doing, we've created here a model for something where there is an equal expression. And I think that's kind of like what matters, is what can you create? And in this space where I do have influence, I kind of like have the power to draw those lines and say what is okay and what is not okay, and negotiate those. So yeah, so being able to create something new is my hope.
Thank you both for those compelling reflections. We have time for one or two more questions.
I want to thank you for the discussion today. I'm William Clayton. As I look at the both of you in terms of your work, and hearing one say that she does not have the rights as the other is certainly something that is long-standing and across cultures, if you will. So the question is there a risk that peace-building efforts inadvertently allow people to avoid confronting the root causes of the conflict? And then how do you ensure that your work doesn't merely treat symptoms, but addresses systemic injustices?
Yeah. Look, I'll say, I'll kind of say this. There are systemic injustices. When I pass a checkpoint, when I used to pass checkpoints, I used to get really angry. And the more I passed checkpoints, I started not to express that anger as much. And that's because I want to be able to focus on the things that matter. If I lose that energy getting angry, and then I won't be able to live my life, basically. I won't be able to get up every day and do the things that and change anything. So it's true, like you become sort of numb in a way. You and right now, this is happening, constantly. The amount of injustice that we're seeing every day, but then what is the result if you get more and more frustrated and you aren't able to do anything? And so that's why we choose to invest elsewhere. And I mean, and I'm very aware of this happening now. I just realized that we don't have the power in this mess, at least not right now. And until we have like grown in numbers, until we have not just in numbers, in strength, in our voice, in our ability to influence, and that takes process and time. So this is kind of like the way I see it, and it's really easy to kind of like I don't know, like I don't want to be here insulting or anything, but like maybe in the United States, like people have the privilege of like talking about this and saying, like, how can you like accept that, and you need to be angry and you need to, yeah, but I can't afford that. I can't afford that because then I won't be able. Right now, I feel in the position that I'm at, I feel that I am I don't know which user, like I have power, I have equal weight, and that will grow. If I was to react to this differently, I wouldn't be in this place. I'm taking responsibility. I'm saying, listen, yes, it's true. I'm oppressed. I don't have the same rights as Jared, but there's so many other things that I can do. And I'm focusing on those other things that I can do. Because I believe that they could be of equal or similar weight eventually. Yeah.
I'll echo that quickly because I know we're conscious of the time here, but I want to play off of that. In obviously, I am representing, whether I like it or not, the position of privilege in this dynamic, as Riman said, quite beautifully. I have, as an immigrant in the state of Israel, I have more rights than Riman or any of my other Palestinian friends whose families have been there for, generations upon generations. Obviously, there are Israeli Jews that can sort of, date their presence back into history, but I cannot. And so I struggle with that on a regular basis. I do not want to forego my ability to have a relationship with the land, but I am very uncomfortable with that particular dynamic, and am doing the best that I can to try to navigate it in a productive way. I will say that one of the reasons why I think I'm able to sort of like hold my discomfort and talk about it publicly, which I do as part of education and activism, is largely because of my upbringing in the United States. Growing up in New Hampshire as a Jew, I certainly, I wouldn't never compare it to the Palestinian experience, given that the dynamic is so different. But I was the only Jew in my community. While we were often, proudly self-identifying as the Jews, it was not easy being the only kid that was sort of different than everything else that was going on. I got made fun of, got beat up. We had swastikas on our house and on our lockers. There was one point in my childhood where somebody burned down the synagogue. And so I want to sort of remain in touch with that sense of feeling different and in a minority, and thanks to whatever I gained through the American education system or the American experience, I want to try to bring that to my Israeli existence, in recognizing that, like Riman said, and William, as you made quite clear, there are some systemic issues that need to be dealt with. And I think in my answer to the last question, I am far less concerned or engaged with these immediate short-term solutions that may be important and may be critical. Clearly, the war cannot end without some form of military/political resolution. But that doesn't address, as you said, William, any of the systemic issues that we're dealing with here. And so I want to engage in those meta conversations about narrative and identity and relationship with land, and faith traditions. And they are happening. I mean, that is the thing that I find so inspiring, is that these things are happening. They're just happening often out of view. They're obviously not starring in any media representation of what goes on in the land. And very rarely do they even get exposed to people who come willing to learn about the land, largely because, in the same way that we, as individuals, as faith communities who live in the land, are quite obsessed with our space and our belonging, the entire world often feels the same way, right? There's the fact that we are the one and only Holy Land for most of the human population means that people come to experience that land, but their bucket list is so predefined and, so whatever, they're not able to sort of dig down and engage with some of those more important grounded issues and conversations. And so I think that's something sort of in bizarre way, both Riman's activities and my activities are often trying to change by bringing more people into a conversation that most folks don't even know exists.
Thank you both, and I applaud you both.
Thank you so much, Riman and Jared, for coming to speak with us today and for really all the work that you do in every, it is a both and, right? The systemic injustices need to be addressed. One of the key strategies for that is building space after space where we can imagine and create equal power and equal voice and generate a vision of what a shared society that really does offer equal rights to all of its citizens would look like. And you are creating those spaces, you are inspiring people with the possibility. And so we will proceed on all fronts in supporting the work that you do. And again, thank you so much for your time and your work. And thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Hey, Jared, I put in the chat